way I want to share this is to share these three stories, starting off with the work that I've been doing on what's called the learning map, and then I'll meander through to a story about what I'm doing on the doing map, and then I'll meander through to a story about what happens when you try and make plans and life has other plans for you, and that's how I'll tie them all together, and I'll finish off the presentation with what I'm doing now and hope to do in the future. So to start off, I want to start with the learning map. This project started about 10 years ago with the birth of my daughter. I wanted to empower her to learn anything that she wanted to. I wanted her to have control over the things that she learns and how she learns. The idea was simple. We wanted to I wanted to take educational content and materials, games and apps and YouTube videos, things like that, and deconstruct them into concepts that can be learned, and then map them onto a learning map, and then string the pathways back together and merge it with all these other pathways that we've deconstructed, so that it becomes a pretty simple tool, but it would allow her to know where she's at, search for something she wants to learn, and then see all the pathways she can take to get to that point where she wants to go. But at this stage, my daughter was way too young, so instead I started working with kids in refugee camps and those that would never go to school, mainly in East Africa. And what was interesting here is these children didn't have access to teachers. And so if we could get this GPS for learning to work within this context, then theoretically it could work in any context. So I just want to share with you briefly how we went about this, because it ties into the other stories. So the way we did this work was to take educational material like curriculum and YouTube videos and lectures and online programs, and deconstruct them into concepts and content. And we separated the concepts from the content. So the concepts became these nodes, and the content we separated, but we tagged the content to the concepts. And once we finished deconstructing the piece of educational material, you would have in general these three parts. You'd have the concepts being taught, you'd have the content related to the concept, and you'd have the links between them, which are the pathways that structure the learning. What we then do is we would extract the effort it takes for you to learn a particular concept. And that was important because we wanted to dynamically show where this concept should sit in a map. And I won't go into too much detail, but what is important here is a learning map is not like a Google map. A Google map is flat, two-dimensional. But in a learning map, we don't just work in two-dimensional space, we work in a multi-dimensional space, because a singular concept has relationships with so many other concepts. So dependent on what your question was to the learning map would change, because you're looking at it from a different angle. And so that's what we did here. Once we deconstructed all the learning material, we wanted to match every concept with other concepts that we had already deconstructed. And so we matched them with referenced nodes. So these are concepts being mentioned within the concept you're learning, but this is a concept that isn't actually being taught, right? So we wanted to make sure that there's a connection there, so that when my daughter, for example, when my daughter is studying mathematics and she's busy learning geometry, I want her to be able to understand that this concept in geometry has a connection to ancient pyramid architecture, because she's interested in that, right? And so while she's learning her math, I wanted her to be able to see the context of all the topics around which relate to what she's learning. And this is why we did this. We also did the same with keywords, so that we can automate this progress through machine learning. We can look at what keywords are relevant or what topics are spoken about within concepts, and we can make those connections. And then once we've done that for a particular map, this is what it ends up looking like. You have the deconstructed pathway in the middle of all the concepts being taught in this particular course, or whatever the case may be, and all the related concepts being mentioned. I won't go into too much detail here, but we would then weight the different connections between the concepts based on the learning content. And you can think of this as almost like Google Maps. When they try to give you a direction from point A to point B, they take into account congestion, and they take into account if you want to take service roads, or if you want to take highways, if you want to go there quick, or if you want to take the scenic route. This is the way that we determine this type of information. And then once you've done that for a curriculum, you repeat that for all of the curriculum, or all the YouTube videos you do, or all the textbooks. And you go through a process of deduplicating or merging the maps. And you get to something that is a big mess, and you can't do anything with it, because I don't know if any of you have seen a graph database. They look really cool for data scientists, and it's all like, wow, this is awesome, but it's almost impossible for anyone to actually use. And so the question is, how do we package this? How do we make it usable to someone like my daughter, who's 5 years old, or was 5 years old? And the idea we came up with was, well, let's not show the map. Let's focus on what the query was from my daughter. So let's sort out all the concepts that relate to that query, and then let's put her in that center of that query and show her all the concepts in concentric rings, becoming more and more and more complex. And then within this map, we can show her recommended pathways. She can learn her particular query. We can show her where her friends are at, if they are learning any of those concepts, and she can speak to her friends. And that's what we did. We built this cool little prototype. We were testing it out in East Africa. And this was all open source, which was all the work that I do is open source. And this was important, but I also struggled to get funding for this. But over the years, I joined a company called Guru, and what was to continue this work. And what was interesting here is that Guru was created by Dr. Prasad Gram, who used to lead the Google Maps team. And so he's now building a Google Maps for learning. He obviously has a huge team with him. And so this work is now continuing under the umbrella of Guru. But this only answered half of the question for me and my daughter. You see, I didn't just want to empower her to learn anything she wants to learn, but I wanted her to be empowered to do anything she wants to do. And this now brings us to the second story, which is the doing map. So while the learning map was teaching my daughter how to learn all the things that she needs to learn, I wanted to also teach her how to do all the things she wants to do. And you can think of these as two sides of the same coin, where on the learning map, we are mapping all the things you can learn. And on the doing map, we map out all the things you can do. And the link between the two is your qualification, your accreditation. And so how do we go about building the doing map? And the doing map is built on the same technology, and it has the same core structure, right? So if on the learning map we had nodes, and these are the concepts that can be learned, then on the doing map, we have an open source project, and these are the parts of the project, which we call bricks, that you have to build. So a brick could be a business model, it could be a piece of software, it could be a piece of technology, it could be a marketing strategy. These are the bricks that make a project work. On the learning map, we would tag content to the concept being taught. But on the doing side of the map, we would tag artifacts to the project being built. So if it was a business model, we could attach various business model strategy papers. If it was a piece of software, we would attach GitHub repositories, or we would attach libraries, or whatever the case may be. And the third is, on the learning map, when you string pieces of learning together, you create a course or a learning path. On the doing map, when you string projects of these bricks together, you create a project. You create something that does something that has a particular input and produces a particular output, right? So the learning map and the doing map are structured very, very similar. And what this would allow us to do is for my daughter to now start to ask the same type of question. Well, how do I build the thing I want to build? And now using the same technology, we can show her all these projects that are doing the thing that she wants to do. And we could show her where she's at on her learning. And we can see all the concentric circles of complexity moving out and the projects that can be built within her query. But the question is, how would we go and create that doing map? Now, in the learning map, we deconstructed educational material. So on the doing map, we would deconstruct open source projects, like the projects on GitHub or project-based learning programs within schools, where students need to work on projects. If we could deconstruct those and put them on a map, then anytime a student wants to build a new project, they can search the map, they can take pieces of that map and say, you know what, I'm going to take this and this and this idea, I'm going to reconstruct them, recombine them, and create my own idea. Or potentially they can take an idea and say, okay, this project worked in East Africa, I want to now make it work in India. So I don't need to make too many changes, I can just localize it to make it work in India. Or potentially, I have this idea and this idea, I'm going to squish them together and merge and make something new. And the hope was that if we can get students to use the learning map, to use the bricks to create something new, and then to share their projects back to the doing map, that this would create a positive feedback loop and rapidly accelerate innovation and projects and open source projects. But the question is, why hasn't this positive feedback loop worked previously? We have lots of open libraries or projects like GitHub and Hackaday.io and OpenIDEO and Ideation. All of these libraries have open source projects. So why aren't we seeing this rapid acceleration of innovation? And I think it comes down to 3 key points. We need a blanket frictionless open license, an open share-alike license, a singular license which is open and share-alike. As soon as you start to add more than one license, the cost, the transaction cost becomes exponential. If you have a singular license, then the transaction cost can be handled within the network. And as an individual, you don't need to worry about it because you know the rules of the game. And so we need a singular open license. Then we need a framework, an interoperable framework to make these projects work with one another. And then thirdly, we need an incentive mechanism, some type of mechanism which makes sense for us to share our ideas openly and share them openly with the ecosystem and have it being used by the ecosystem copied. So there's the incentive mechanism. I won't go into interoperability and incentive mechanism here, but these are the 3 things we definitely need. And now just a side note, why is this all important? I think it's important because we have such a huge number of global challenges. We somehow need to rapidly accelerate the innovation that we are producing to meet the needs of these global challenges. And I think the only way we can do that is through open innovation. And the reason why I think that's only possible through open innovation is by looking at the difference between open and closed innovation. Within closed innovation, usually you have this great big idea, right? You usually have this yourself or maybe in your company. You then work you go through a design loop, you work and you make this idea really good. Maybe you get to product market fit and that becomes a success. But it's at this stage that the innovation stagnates, because once an innovation hits success, the innovation then only focuses on incremental improvements because it doesn't want to destroy its business model. And so innovation stagnates very, very quickly. So let's look at the difference between that and open innovation. Within open innovation, you not only have your big idea, but you see everybody else's big idea. And so even before you start, you can pick and choose from other people's ideas and learn from them, and start with not just your big idea, but with everyone else's. And then the cycle is very similar. But here at each stage, again, you have the ideas of the whole ecosystem. And at each stage, the ecosystem can copy and fork your project and do something completely different. So they go, you have a singular idea being forked multiple times, and all these people are trying different avenues to make it a success. And what this allows us to do is to rapidly produce successful innovation and more of it. And then one last point, if we take all the global challenges, and if we chart them and we look at the severity, it follows a power law distribution, where the top 20% of the world's challenges create 80% of the issues we have. And it's this 20% of challenges where we can create business models to solve them. It's really easy to create business models to solve the top 20% of the world's challenges, right? People want to fund renewable energies, for example. There is money there, but there's a whole section of problems, this bottom 80%, where it's almost impossible within the current climate, the current economic climate, to produce sustainable business models to solve these. And so these are key challenges. So those were just side thoughts. So building the doing side of the map is a huge project, and I couldn't do it on my own. And so I started working with a bunch of other folks around, and now together with Guru as well. And this was all going very well until life happened. And over the course of just a few hours, my daughter suddenly became paralyzed. And the doctors didn't know what was happening, but she, over the course of a few weeks, she became better, but her left arm was completely paralyzed. The motor neuron damage in her left arm was permanent. So my daughter and I were in the hospital bed, and now suddenly she had this project she wanted to do. And so while we were still in the hospital, we started to research what options are there available for us. And we looked and we found these projects, and some of these projects were really interesting because they were building exoskeletons, brain-controlled exoskeletons that were teaching paralyzed people to move again. And so we thought, okay, this is awesome. Let's do this. Let's try do this. So we reached out to these projects, but they were all closed. None of them wanted to share what they were doing with us. So we decided to try and build our own. But we had no idea what we were doing or where even to start. So the question was, would we be able to build the learning map to teach us all the things we needed to learn? And then would we be able to build a doing map to build all the things we needed to build? Our assumption was obviously no, but we asked people questions related to the learning map and the doing map, like how do we learn X or Y or Z? How do we build X, Y, or Z? And within weeks, we got people all around the world to help us do this and help us build both the learning map and the doing map and bring everything together. And so every day we started to build and work on this. And we came home from school, and instead of doing homework, we actually worked on this. And we started to learn all the things we needed to learn. We started to build all the things we needed to build. And in the end, over several months, we built this brain-controlled exoskeleton, which allowed her to use her left arm. And I encourage you we have some YouTube videos of a story where she's presenting this whole thing. I encourage you to watch it. It's really, she's wonderful. But what was really cool about this is not only did it work, it also did something we couldn't dream of, and that is it regenerated her motor neurons. She's now able to use her left arm. She's regained about 40% of the strength. Her shoulder's still paralyzed because we haven't been able to build anything for her shoulder, but that is an open source project, and there's people helping us do that. But this is just one example of what's able to be done when we openly share everything we learn and everything we do. And what's interesting here is that this project is one of those projects which lies within that 8% curve. This is a perfect example of what can be achieved when we openly share everything we learn, and when we openly share all the things we do. It's in this area that open innovation really accelerates. And so that's my work now, is on projects that openly share all the things that we can learn on the learning map, and then share all the things that we can do on a doing map. And I'm working together with a number of organizations to do that. And I just wanted to share with you now quickly where we are today. We're working in 2 layers, the foundational layer and the tools layer. On the foundational layer, this is where we are building the various maps. And so far with Guru has mapped out most of K-12 math and science. We've started to map out skills training, some professional training, English, and then a whole bunch of early literacy and numeracy in India as well. And on the tools layer, we've built these really cool GPS-like tools. It's tools for students and for educators and for curriculum designers and for researchers to use. And we've had some pretty good growth on these tools so far as well. What we're working on now is to map out the rest of education. Can we map out all of education? Can we map out everything from pre-K to PhD level material from all of the open educational resources that we have around us, including YouTube videos and textbooks and everything else? Can we map those out? And the hope is that one day we'll be able to map out all human knowledge so that you can learn anything you want to through this open, freely available tool. And I will leave it there. If you want to learn more information about those, you can find it on DefRex and guru.org. And then I will leave this, this thought with you. Assuming linear growth in these maps, we could expect to exceed the complexity of the human mind by 2030. Yeah, so I'll leave it there.